And we're live. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to the second episode of Thoughts Adventure Podcast. So today we are going to be focusing on the question, or the following question: can God be proven rationally? And today we are joined by Brother Abdul. Assalamu alaikum, Abdul.
Wa alaikum salam.
And Brother Jake. Assalamu alaikum, Jake.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you both doing?
Good,
yeah, alhamdulillah, doing really well. So
Wa alaikum salam.
we're going to be joined by Brother Sharif soon, inshallah. Just want to make a request to anyone who's watching to just make a dua, as his father-in-law passed away recently and quite unexpectedly. So just make sure you keep him in your prayers. May Allah have mercy upon him and make the loss easy on those who cared for him. Ameen. So yeah, so where do you want to begin with this? I think Brother Sharif, he did write out a couple of things he wanted to kind of go over, so we'll need to wait for him to turn up to kind of go over what he mentioned there. But Jake, do you want to take the lead here and kind of open it up a bit? Or
Sure. So the topic of discussion is, can God be proven rationally? The reason why we decided to have a stream on this is because we frequently talk with atheists online, and they obviously would say no, that God cannot be proven rationally. For us, Muslims, on the other hand, we believe that God can be proven rationally, and we're happy to present some arguments for that, possibly, and defend it. And so this stream generally is going to be about us providing evidence, hopefully, that we can prove that God exists through rational means, not merely relying on Scripture alone. And then we would like to have a discussion. Hopefully, we can get a few atheists on to discuss this issue with us. Now, there are a number of different ways that Muslim theologians have given as far as proving that God exists rationally. One way that I personally like, and you guys are free to interact with it and present your own methods if need be. But one of the famous arguments that was proposed by Imam Ghazali and sort of furthered by him, and then kind of popularized today, rejuvenated in a sense by a Christian apologist, William Lane Craig, and that's the Kalam cosmological argument, which basically, I'll just give a brief summary of what it is. It says, premise one, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise two, the universe began to exist, and the conclusion is, therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, we can go into detail. I don't know how much detail we want to go into as far as the introduction to the stream is in terms of providing evidence for each one of the premises. But generally speaking, the first premise is, to me, somewhat obvious, that whatever exists begins to exist has a cause. Now, typically, atheists will respond will say, well, what about God? Well, they kind of missed the point in the premise that says whatever begins to exist. Yep. Now, our understanding of God is that he's eternal. So he doesn't fall under the category of the first premise because it's applying to things that begin to exist. It doesn't apply to eternal things.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's to me, it's just an obvious premise that we see in our everyday life, everything that we experience that has a beginning or begins to exist, there's some type of cause behind it. It doesn't just pop into existence from nothing, out of nowhere. We don't experience these things whatsoever. Now, as far as the universe beginning to exist, Imam Ghazali, since he didn't have much of the science available to him that we have today, he primarily relied on philosophical argumentation based on the absurdity of an actual infinite. So he basically argued that an eternal universe would assume an actual infinite. That means, like if you take a look at the 20th century mathematician George Cantor, who's famous for set theory, he even explains that we can hypothesize or work in terms of mathematical confines around the idea of these infinite sets. But he even says that and David Hilbert, who's a German mathematician, said the same thing, that in terms of the actual infinite existing in the physical world, we don't have it anywhere. So we have evidence from modern mathematicians who speak about the actual infinite. It doesn't exist anywhere in reality. We can go into some of the absurdities that Imam Ghazali pointed out as far as contradictory things that we see when we analyze the actual infinite. I'll just give a little simple example. If I ask the audience, what is the quantity of the set of natural numbers, meaning all of the natural numbers that exist? Well, they're going to say infinite, okay? But what is the quantity of the set of even numbers? Well, it's actually the same thing, infinite. But it seems like a contradiction, because if the natural set includes both the even and the odd numbers, then how is it that merely the even numbers, which is half of the natural numbers, is also equal to the whole set? And so that's why even in mathematics, they have different degrees of infinity, that some are bigger than others. And we don't have any experience of this in the real world. So this is all of the sort of philosophical argumentation for the second premise, basically that you wind up with these absurdities from an actual infinite existing. Then we have evidence also as far as scientific evidence from especially recently with things like Big Bang cosmology, cosmic microwave background, all of these different things that point to an actual beginning of the universe. So with that in mind, I think the two premises are strong. I think there's a lot of evidence and support from them that leads us to the conclusion that there is a cause of the universe that is outside of space and time, that was the creator of space and time itself. And we can go into more detail about what the attributes of that cause is or cause are, but that's a general, just brief summary of the argument. So I don't know if you guys want to comment on that at all, or
definitely
answer the question in another way for yourselves.
So there's two things I want to touch on. First is when you're talking to, like, for an atheist, and he likes to bring up this idea of, well, mathematics has this concept of there being multiple infinites of different sizes and so on and so forth. Like, because one infinite can be bigger than the next. Now, the biggest issue here is that they move from the ideal realm of mathematics and then try to apply it into like the ontological, as if they're not making like a category error here, and they're talking about specifically one thing, which is theoretical. We're talking in terms of something that's not even infinite in the absolute sense. Like there are lots of limits on a set of numbers. Like when you're talking about the natural line of numbers, for example, we're not talking about pigs. We're not talking about camels and flowers and recipes and blood. Like there's all these other things that we're excluding. No, we're focusing simply on numbers, and then also we're focusing on a particular pattern of numbers. So we're saying +1, +1, +1, +1 repeatedly forever. We're not saying like +10, +20, -13, blah 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 blah. So there's a very specific set of rules that are applied which limit how we're going to progress when we're talking about counting numbers or set theory or anything when we're talking infinite in terms of mathematics. You apply these limits and then you start talking about this is not identical to the idea of like an infinite being, or a being which we're saying has an actual reality and isn't just ideal or like in the realm of the theoretical. And they often kind of make this distinction and go, oh well, in mathematics we have this idea of set theory and we have this idea of multiple infinites, so therefore we can apply this to the creation or to the creator, and say that there is multiple infinite beings and blah blah blah. Now the issue with this is that there can't be multiple infinites in a real sense, like, because the infinite, if you have infinite A and you have infinite B, as say we're focusing on God's infinite power, for example, he's all powerful, which is to say that everything any power that there is under his control. He is the distributor of power, and whatever power there is belongs to him. Now, you can't have multiple of them, because the simple case is if you have infinite A and then infinite B, that these two things have to be exclusive. They can't be the same thing. Otherwise, you're not talking about multiple infinites. You're talking about one. So to say that there's an infinite A and an infinite B, and this can go on for as long as you want, infinite C, infinite D, to say that, you have to say that these things are mutually exclusive, that they're not the same thing, that they are distinct from one another. Now, to say that they're distinct from one another is to say that there is power beyond the control of each of them. The power of A is not within the control of power B, and the all-powerful B is not within the control of the all-powerful A, and so neither of them are therefore all-powerful. That you get into this absurdity. If you're talking about the all-powerful, whatever has power, it has power over it. And when you understand this principle, you understand that there can only be one all-powerful thing. Obviously, that isn't to go into proving that this all-powerful thing exists necessarily from the comments I've just made. It's just to talk about the absurdity of trying to posit multiple all-powerful beings or multiple infinites. In an ontological sense, in terms of reality, not the theoretical, not the ideal, but in the real existence of something, if it has an infinite attribute, it can only be one. And it cannot be one that can be multiplied. It cannot be divided. None of this. And this is the Islamic conception of God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. And so the other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on is, so for me, there's a number of things that we can kind of go into about the infinite regress. And if someone comes on, there's likely going to be a number of objections to this that we can go over, and I won't ruin it now by going into them too much, and we can discuss it inshallah when someone comes on. But personally, I prefer to focus on contingency. That is that if for me, whether or not the infinite regress is possible is a bit superfluous. It can be a fun conversation, and I do think that the infinite regress is absurd. But when you'll always come across people, but regardless of how much into the conversation you go, you always end up in a dead end in certain places. Where you can't really make any more progress. So personally, I like to focus on this idea that all contingent beings are dependent upon something beyond themselves. And if you take the set of all dependent things, that the set is itself dependent. And the thing that the set of all dependent things is dependent on cannot be in the set. And so it must be outside of the set. And if it's outside of the set, it can't be itself dependent, because if it was, it would be in the set. So the set of all dependent things is dependent on something outside itself, which itself isn't dependent and is independent by necessity. And basically from there, you get this the idea of a number of attributes that we're referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then obviously from there, you've then got to start to try to justify the other attributes. So for example, life, will, etc. And inshallah we can get into them, but these are the ones that I like to focus on. I find it very interesting. The usual rebuttal, or the attempts of a rebuttal to this, is the fallacy of composition, and they try to say, oh well, something that applies to a part doesn't necessarily apply to the whole. The issue here, I would always say, is that, well, it depends on what you're talking about. If I'm talking about a brick, and I say this one brick is hard and this one brick is red, if I build a really big wall, that wall is also going to be really hard and it's going to be red. It's not, just because you've got a number of them, these particular attributes don't disappear. And obviously, if you have had experiences of building brick walls, you'll know that every time you build a brick wall, it's it has these particular attributes. If you're using red bricks, the wall's going to be red. If it's if one brick's hard, then all of them are going to be hard. And with regards to dependency, or things being dependent, I would say that the dependency falls into this category. And the reason is because there's countless examples. Like everywhere we look, you take any set, small or big, as minute as all of the things in my office, to as large as a solar system, to a galaxy, and you keep looking, all of these things are dependent upon things outside of themselves. There's no examples of the alternative. There's no examples of a set of dependent things that isn't dependent upon something beyond itself. And so I would say that, it's reasonable, it's more reasonable to suggest that the set of all dependent things, when regardless of the quantity or the amount in any particular set, the set of all dependent things is itself dependent upon something outside of the set. And yeah, so I've gone on a bit of a ramble there. I'll give someone else, Abdul, if you would like to add any comments or anything, and then
Yeah.
if there's any questions.
Yeah. So I thought like we'd give a bit of an intro on these arguments in general, and you guys have done a good job in doing that. But personally, I'd like to start with what like with the philosophy of argumentation itself. What are arguments, and what might make an argument convincing to a person? And personally, I like Graham Oppy's philosophy of argumentation, because oftentimes you see people presenting arguments in the form that we're presenting right now: premise, conclusion, and most of the work is often done in between the premises, where you derive the following premise from the first premise, and then the conclusion from the first two premises. But it's almost always going to depend on a person's prior commitments, whether he accepts these premises or not. I mean, a person can simply reject one of the premises you're presenting. For example, the first premise in the Kalam: everything that begins to exist has a cause. Someone can have an alternate theory of causality that rejects that, and they could just simply for that reason reject the argument and say that it's not sound. So I think where most of the work is done is really when you look at the overarching theories or worldview of the person, and you an argument, according to Graham Oppy, is only going to do work if you give someone a premise that's going to show him that his prior commitments will, based on this premise, lead him to some sort of an inconsistency. And since we don't like inconsistencies, no one wants to have an epistemology that leads to inconsistencies, then they'll have some work to do. So overall, I think there's a much more nuanced understanding of argumentation in general than what it seems to be in a lot of these internet discussions. And about arguments for the existence of God, I mean, whether God can be proven rationally, I think it's a very broad question, and we have understandings about our justification for God, all the way from Reformed epistemology to a priori arguments like ontological arguments to a posteriori arguments like the cosmological arguments you guys are talking about. And personally, I agree with Brother Yusuf Ponders that the contingency argument is the most preferable one to me personally, because it just undercuts many of the objections that we can find for the raised at the Kalam cosmological argument. But I just wanted to make a few comments about what Jake said. I think, like, from my personal thinking and researching about actual infinite, I think it's better to say that, I mean, I'm undecided on this, but I think it's better to say that an actual infinite of causally connected events is impossible. I don't think it's just. I don't think we should put it just out there in the absolute that any kind of infinite is impossible, because I think that leads to problems, not just problems with theism, but problems in general. So yes, an actual infinite of causally connected events does lead to many kinds of absurdities, many of which Jake has mentioned. William Lane Craig defends this very well. And he talks about, for example, how an infinite series of causally connected events, for example, if time was infinite, then we could have never reached this point of time, because in order to reach this point of time, we would have to traverse an actual infinite amount of time in order to reach this time, and an actual infinite cannot be traversed. And you could sort of formulate this in a certain way where it would take you to an explicit contradiction. An actual infinite, an endless amount of time would literally have to end in order for us to reach this point of time. But it is endless, so it by definition cannot end. So there's a problem with that. Alexander Proust as well is a very good defender of causal finitism. We have a lot of he defends the view that any chain of causal events must be finite in order for it to lead to a certain effect, and there are many paradoxes that show this to be true, like the Grim Reaper paradox, and he has his own formulations of it. It's very complicated, so I'm not going to go through it here, but there are also good objections to it, and it's a very interesting back and forth. But the contingency argument and the way Brother Yusuf put it forward, I think is it just cuts to the chase, because as Brother Yusuf put it, if you have an infinite, even if you have an infinite series of events or an infinite number of things, if we're going to ask the question that why something exists rather than nothing, which is the question we're asking. I mean, it's important to know what question we're asking at the outset. Then appealing to the infinite series to explain the infinite series is quite circular, and that might not be problematic as long as you have something that transcends the contingent things within the series. So the reason we look for explanations is because contingent things require explanations. And you were talking about the fallacy of composition. So this is an objection that's levied a lot about towards the contingency argument, and there are many good responses to it, like we from our experience alone, like we can make an inductive argument from extrapolation that from our experience alone, like if this is a contingent thing, right? This cup, and contingent things are things that could have failed to exist. Like there's no logical necessity that would necessitate this cup's existence. So if I have this contingent thing on its own, I know that it requires an explanation external to itself in order to exist. Now, no matter how much I multiply these cups, if I give you 100 cups or 1,000,000 cups or 1,000 cups, we're still going to require an external explanation. And I think a good distinction to make when it comes to the fallacy of composition is when we're talking about relative properties and absolute properties. So a relative property is something like size. Like a wall is made up of small bricks, but the wall as a whole is not small, because the word small here is used ambiguously, and the way it's used in the first statement is not the same way it's used in the second. So that's a relative property that doesn't apply to the whole. But we have good reason to assume that something like contingency, or the fact that contingent things are dependent, is not a relative property, because there's nothing about the multiplicity of contingent things that rids them of a need for an explanation. And yeah, I think that's good enough for an introduction. And Brother Sharif.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Sharif.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Nice to have you with us, bro.
Jazakallah khair. Sorry, man. I was unfortunately been a bit busy last couple of days, so
don't apologize, bro.
Yeah, so
we made a little request for everyone to make dua for your father-in-law. Sorry for your loss. So to God we all belong, to Him we all return. May He make it easy for you and your family.
Ameen. Yeah. So I was just catching a few of the points that the brothers were making. So although I didn't quite hear all of Abdulrahman's point, but I think one issue that needs to be sort of generally explained is that this topic about proof for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the rational belief in a creator, firstly I would say is that it's intuitive. So it's something that is innate within human beings to accept that there is a belief in a creator, that things that just exist, that are, as Abdulrahman mentioned, about contingent or limited or dependent, requires an explanation outside of nature itself. I think that's normal, that's natural. And I think also, sometimes we have to go into some of the details of this discussion simply because atheist philosophers have come in and started to muddy the water. And I think that's why maybe some of the topics or the points that I've mentioned maybe seem quite convoluted or high level, maybe even to a certain extent abstract. But that's only because the very obvious concepts and obvious understanding about belief in a creator has been, muddied by people trying to critique it from various angles. That's just my initial thoughts, anyway.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the kid in the lake who's kicking mud up and then complaining he can't see half of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah. So if we've not got anything else anyone wants to add,
I just wanted to add a small distinction. I don't think we clarified that in the beginning.
Yep.
That there are. We need to make a distinction between stage 1 cosmological arguments and stage 2 cosmological arguments. So let's say, for example, the contingency argument. There's the stage 1 contingency argument. And the only aim of the stage 1 contingency argument is to take you to a necessary being or a necessary foundation of reality.
Yeah.
As far as that's concerned, you could be an atheist and accept stage 1 contingency argument and just believe that there's something necessary that isn't necessarily God. And the stage 2 contingency argument is more concerned with the nature of the necessary foundation of reality, and it tries to make the inference from necessary being to God. And a lot of atheists, philosophers, and laymen alike are starting to find the stage 1 of the contingency argument very appealing. So what they normally do is they accept it and they say that there is something necessary. However, that necessary thing doesn't necessarily have to be God, and that's where the stage 2 contingency arguments come in.
Yep, definitely. So we've got one guest waiting at the moment. Just for everyone else who wants to know, there is a link. I'll post it in the comments again for you to be able to join in the stream. If you click on it, it's a StreamYard link. You should see it in the comments now, but it should also be pinned at the top of the comments. And I'm going to add it to the description box temporarily. I'll delete that after we've finished the stream. So there's 3 places you can find it. Do share the link to other places as well, or even just this YouTube link. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't, as this is a new channel and we're relatively low on the sub count at the moment. I think we've got about 250. Alhamdulillah, it's gone up a decent amount considering we only started it a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, just make sure you share, subscribe, like, and comment. And inshallah, if you want to join in the stream, click the StreamYard link and then you should be able to jump on. But we've got a brother here who's called Bosnian Muslim. Assalamu alaikum. Is it Edin or Edin?
Edin.
Edin.
Assalamu
alaikum.
I'm actually so nervous right now, subhanAllah. But to be honest, I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to give you like a feedback and a request, if that's possible. So
yeah, go ahead.
When it comes to the streams, or have you considered possibly, just cutting out like parts that you consider, I guess, highlights and just post them, because I think a lot of people don't really like just watch the whole stream back.
Yeah, no, inshallah, we do plan on doing things like that. We did it with the last one. There was a shorter clip we added of the atheist. It was a bit clickbaity as well. And we went in, atheist considers becoming Muslim. Inshallah, everyone make dua that he does. But yeah, no, it's a really good. We're going to try and do. Here's a tip as well. So if you do see anything you think would be worthy of becoming a shorter clip, a really good thing to do to help us out, and just people in general, is to leave a comment with the timestamps you think a clip should begin and end, and then like even just giving suggestions for a potential title of that thing. And if you do that, that just makes it a lot easier, because half of the time what we end up having to do is kind of like watch the video over again in full, and then start taking notes of where we should cut and clip. Whereas if people, they think that there is a particular part that would make a really good separate video on its own, just make a comment with the timestamps, beginning and end, where you think a clip would be useful, and maybe, like I say, a title suggestion. But yeah, no, Jazakallah khair, it's a great suggestion.
I'll definitely do that. I guess the request or question that I wanted to ask was, like right now I have a philosophy class, right?
Oh, mashallah.
So I'm in 12th grade. I know I'm actually turning 18 in like 2 weeks, so it won't be a problem. But
where are you from, brother? A Bosnian? I guess you're Bosnian.
I'm Bosnian, but I live in Germany.
Okay.
So in my philosophy class, like my teacher, she's kind of like, we talked about evolution, right? And right now we're talking about utilitarianism. And because you study philosophy, I was wondering if sometime in the future you could maybe do a stream on like morality, because I'd love to be able to, I guess, from an Islamic point of view, kind of not refute utilitarianism, but show her why I think it's false.
Yeah, well, that's a large conversation, because there's even certain Islamic theologians that argued like Islamic morality from a utilitarian perspective as well, like Ibn Taymiyyah. I'll be pleased with him. And so it's, there's a bit of a back and forth. I think the biggest issue It's just trying to quantify unquantifiables. So that's the thing for me. So like when you're talking about levels and degrees of pain, how do you measure that? How do you compare that? How do you compare, say, for example, any kind of level of pain that a chicken might experience to the pain of a human?
The thing is, she told us, the reason why I asked that was because she actually told us last lesson that next lesson we are going to be talking about, like, I guess what we see as problematic with the theory. And obviously I found like a few things, like, for example, the whole point system, whatever, is like, it's very like highly subjective, I feel like.
Yeah.
Then it's like no
Well, one of the
things
morality is a huge discussion, and it needs a stream on its own. But just one of the things to take into consideration is that you can't really look at morality in a vacuum. I think Jake and I had a discussion with someone about this before. It's like so utilitarianism, or if you look at like consequentialism, which I think there are always some aspects of consequentialism in all structures of morality. The fact that you label it utilitarianism doesn't really give you, as Yusuf was pointing out, the metrics by which you're gonna base your foundation for the maximal amount of good, right? So fine, utilitarianism, you could say it's okay, but we're not going to just take it and run with it in a vacuum, because there are a lot of questions to ask about the foundations of your morality and what, and this is where subjective and objective morality comes in. And a theist will maybe appeal to divine command theory or whatever, but generally speaking, it's very useful to realize as well that under certain worldviews there are moral frameworks that are understandable for within the worldview. Like, for example, if an atheist tells me that his basis for morality is well-being, and he defines well-being in a certain way, I would be very I would be very understanding with him, and I would say that under your framework and within your worldview, it makes sense. Like, if I were an atheist, that would be my understanding of well-being, and that would be my moral framework. It doesn't mean I don't have problems with the moral framework. I can raise problems, but from within a different worldview. That's why there's a more overarching discussion to be had about worldviews as a whole and what your worldview entails. So I think it's a very complicated discussion.
It is, and just simply because this is quite a large conversation, and this stream we're trying to focus specifically on rational proofs for God and things like that. If you don't mind, if we just leave that there for the time being, maybe inshallah, this might be a good suggestion for a future topic, and we can obviously invite you back on then and maybe go into it in a bit more detail at that point.
Yeah, no problem. Apologies for going completely.
It's okay. It's okay. It was only a couple of minutes.
Have you got a specific? Brother, have you got a specific question or comment on this particular topic?
So
the rational proofs of God.
Well, when it comes to rationally finding God, like I always go with the whole Kalam cosmological argument type of path, where it's like everything has a cause, right? And
everything that begins to exist.
And then exactly. And then because I'm not saying that we know that the universe had a beginning, but it's a scientific consensus from what I've understood, and that would mean that the universe had a beginning, and that because you have to have a first cause, and otherwise you have infinite regress, and then that first cause would have to be infinite. So that was actually something that I was quite confused about, because I'm not sure if you watched that stream, but when Muhammad Hijab was on Hamza's stream, there was this one guy called Isan, and then he was like, well, how do you know that whatever caused the universe didn't cease to exist? Well, how can it cease to exist? It's infinite, right?
So that's right. The whole point is that you're coming to a conclusion of an independent
unless
being,
if it ceases to exist, then it's contingent.
A necessary being or an independent being. So independent by definition means something that has to exist. Exists by its own being, in essence. So by that point, then you can't come to a conclusion that there is something that created the universe and then ceased to exist, because then no longer is it eternal or independent.
You're talking about a possible being in that case. So a necessary being, another way of wording that is that it cannot not exist.
Yes.
And so, you know, it's non-existence is impossible. Whereas the like a possible being, its existence is possible, but so is its non-existence. And
So what he's saying is basically a contradiction in terms. I mean, because what he's basically saying is that what if the necessary being wasn't a necessary being? So it's literally meaningless, because a necessary being can't not exist. And he's saying, what if it ceases to exist? Well, if it ceases to exist, then it's not necessary. So
yeah. I feel like the way the atheists kind of approach this, like I don't mind, you know, an atheist saying I don't believe in God and stuff like that. Okay, sure, but it's when they go as far as to say, well, fine tuning, prove to me that the universe couldn't have been any different. Prove to me this, prove to me that. Well, like at some point you have to just reason, and you know, you should be able to like reason and not just like ask for empirical evidence for every single point, because you can't always give some kind of empirical evidence.
Yeah, but you know, the issue is this, is that for them to ask him for empirical evidence indicates that they recognize that the thing that they're talking about is not a necessary being. Yeah. So, for example, you know, when we look at for empirical evidence or scientific evidence, what in essence we're looking for is the reason or explanation behind why a thing exists the way it does. Yeah, because we understand rationally and intuitively that the thing itself doesn't explain its own existence. Yeah. When we're talking about contingent realities, as an example, we would never rationally, or sorry, scientifically try to understand why the internal angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees on a flat surface. Yeah. So in triangle, internal angles on a flat surface always adds up to 180 degrees. Nobody says, well, we need to rationally or scientifically investigate why this is the case. Yeah. But if we were to say, for example, why does an electron have a particular spin? Yeah, then we would scientifically investigate this, because in the first case of the triangle, we're saying that it's necessary by its own existence that it has the internal angles. Yeah. And when we talk about the second case of an electron or an atom or anything within the physical world that occupies time and space, then we're asking the reason why, because we know that it's not necessary. Yeah. Now, the issue for atheists or empiricists is this, is that if they're going to keep asking the question why a contingent thing, which basically means something that could exist or could not exist, yeah, or doesn't have to have the attributes that it has, so it needs an explanation outside of itself to explain itself. If they keep asking that question, then either they're going to go for an infinite regress, yeah, keep asking another question and another question and another question, or they're going to stop at a brute fact, which in essence is saying that there's a contingent being, and it's contingent, but it just is, which is a self-contradiction. Or they come to the conclusion of a necessary independent being, i.e. the creator. Yeah. So they've got those three particular options that are open for them. Now, when people start affirming brute facts, they're effectively arguing for magic. Yeah. And
Yes,
as
exactly.
and as you probably know, is an infinite regress is something which we'd say is logically absurd.
Yeah, it's not possible at all. But the thing that I don't understand is, from an atheistic point of view, right? If we say that we believe that this, you know, infinite necessary being is God, but if for example, energy, right? For science tells us that energy, or I don't know if it's science or physics, but
Yeah, first law of
energy
thermodynamics.
can't be created or destroyed inside a closed system, right?
Yeah.
But how do they even come to that? So I guess my question is, they don't know anything like outside of the system, so how would they even know that that's the case only inside the system?
Well, look, when we look at laws of nature, particularly in science like thermodynamic laws, what we're talking about here is really a well-established scientific theory built upon an inductive process. Yeah, so it's induction. Maybe I'm sure you know, but for the audience, induction is where you go from particular observations and you come to a generalized conclusion. Yeah. So the particular observation is that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but transforms from one form to another, and we generalize that to the whole. Yeah. So we then talk about it as a law, and then that becomes a paradigm by which we observe things. Yeah. So when they talk about the first law or the second law of thermodynamics, what they're talking about are inductive conclusions. So they're not definite. Yeah. Even in the scientific basis. And secondly is they become a paradigm by which we can then explain other phenomena. Yeah, so there's nothing necessary about them, and that point about it not being necessary requires us to ask the question: why is the energy the way it is? Why does it behave in the way it behaves? Because it's not from the definition of energy; it's from our experience of energy. Yeah, the limited experience of energy. We're going to still ask the question: why does it behave that way? Why does E equals mc squared? Yeah, as opposed to E equals mc cubed. Yeah, so we're going to ask these types of questions. So the fact that we can conceive of a potential different way energy behaves within this universe indicates it's a possibility. It's not a necessity.
Well, I guess I can actually end on that, because that's where my knowledge, that's where it ends. How should I end this? Well, may Allah bless all of the brothers. You really make it very confident to speak, because I'm usually very nervous and shy. So so thank you for that. And I'll be definitely there, but when you start the next stream, because I was actually watching Shabir Yusuf's stream right now on SC Dawa, because I had a conversation with him, and very, very intelligent person. So maybe you could possibly get him on one of your streams.
Yeah, inshallah. Good to have him on. But yeah, Jazakallah khair for coming on and asking your questions.
Yeah, no problem. May Allah bless all of you and your families.
And you, bro. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. MashaAllah, he was a nice bloke.
Alaikum salam.
So we've got a couple more guests on here. The next one that was in the queue was Fadi. Hello, Fadi. Are you Muslim, non-Muslim, atheist? Or...
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my brothers. I am Muslim. I am Palestinian and live in Gaza Strip. Alhamdulillah for everything. I am Muslim.
Alhamdulillah. Nice to have you here, bro. How can we help you? What's your questions?
My brother Yusuf. I sent you a message by your Twitter. I hope you see
on Twitter. Message. Probably not. Okay. I have too many notifications. So if you want to get in touch with me, the best bet is on email, which I'll put on the screen now.
Okay, my brother Yusuf. I am not perfect at speaking English, but okay. But I can communicate what I want.
Inshallah.
Really, my brother. I need everyone here, and I will explain something, please.
Is it related to the subject of the live stream? So we're talking today specifically about can God be proved rationally? If it's so long as it's about this, because we've already kind of gone off on one tangent a little bit today. We want to try and stay a little bit focused. So if you got.
Okay, my brother Yusuf, I understand what you see, but really, I am here. I hope you can give me a chance for explain something, inshallah, my brother Yusuf, and Jazakallah khair, my brother Yusuf, Yusuf.
What would you like to explain?
The first, I'm Fadi from Palestine and live in Gaza Strip. Everyone knows how harsh situation here in Gaza Strip. I know the world around me is suffering, but my brother Yusuf, everyone in the dunya, doing everything for al-akhirah and reward. My brother Yusuf. Now, I will explain what I need here.
Yeah, go ahead, bro.
My brother Yusuf, really, my brother Yusuf, I need you, and I need everyone here for operation in my left hand, my brother Yusuf. My brother Yusuf, I hope you see what I've sent you by Twitter, my brother Yusuf. Really.
Okay, like I say, bro, I probably won't get it on Twitter because there's just too much going on there. So if you send me an email, I'll check it out, inshallah, and then we'll have a look into it. and see what we can do.
Inshallah, my brother Yusuf.
Okay, bro. It's been a pleasure talking
May
to
Allah
you.
make it easy for you, inshallah.
I mean, and I'll get in touch with you on, like I say, just email me and we'll speak then, inshallah. You still there?
Jazakallah khair. Just maybe a reminder to the brothers and sisters watching is that we can't really accept any donation requests or asking for that on this channel because we don't deal with money, so we can't really do that, and we can't verify people's requests either. So we do apologize, and I'm sure Yusuf apologizes as well. Is that we unfortunately we can't take these types of requests on here. Jazakallah khair.
So the next guest we've got on here now is Brother Justin again. MashaAllah. Ooh.
What's up, guys?
Bro? What go on?
Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Good to have you here. How have you been in the past 2 weeks? What's been going on?
Just working a whole bunch.
Any closer to Shahada yet?
Huh?
Any closer to taking Shahada yet?
I'm learning 109, I think, right now.
Oh, let me see.
Yeah. 109. I don't know exactly what it's called, but
I'll find out now.
it's very close to 114.
Yeah.
Very close to 114.
Al-Kafirun.
Let's it'd be nice to hear you say if you're willing to try to see if you can read what you've
Do Surah Al-Ikhlas for us, Justin.
What a class! So I won't do
Surah Al-Ikhlas. Qul huwallahu ahad.
Allah.
Yeah.
You know that one, don't you?
112. I know. I can do
112. Yeah.
I can do 112 and 114 right now if you want me to.
Yeah, go
for
bro.
it, man.
Okay, so and I may jumble some pronunciations up, but I'll try my best.
Bro. We just want to see
Okay,
how well
Surah 1 is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin Ar-Rahmanir Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in Idina Siratal Mustaqim Siratal Ladina An'amta Alaihim Ghayril Maghdubi Alaihim Waladdallin.
You're doing well, bro.
I mean,
Okay.
How long have you been
Alhamdulillah.
And then we have 112 was it's my favorite one, which is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim Kul Huwallahu Ahad Allahu Samad Lam Yulid wa Lam Yulid wa Lam Yakun Lahu Kufuwan Ahad. Okay.
How long are you spending learning them?
Huh?
How long have you been spent trying to learn them?
Couple months. I would say probably about 4 or 5 months on and off. I haven't constantly been trying to learn it. Like I will literally practice one, and if I go for 2 days constantly, I'll be able to memorize it.
Well, for a man with an army of children, you're doing really well, bro.
Yeah.
You got a lot of whippersnappers running around your ankles at the same time, so
I got one in here trying to keep him quiet playing with some toys.
Justin, have you got any questions or points that you want to raise on the particular topic at hand?
So
we're talking about, is belief in God rational?
Yeah. So the topic of the show, like when I saw the thumbnail, is can God be proven rationally? And I don't know if I would agree with can God be proven rationally. I think God can be argued for rationally. I think the arguments that we've been through within the last 6 to 8 months of talking to each other seem very rational. I mean, there's no reason why I could call these things irrational.
So when you say proof, you like what? How do you define proof? So do you not think there can be rational proofs?
Something that can be shown definitively, without any reasonable doubt coming from my frame of mind.
And can that be done purely rationally, or is that explicitly something?
Here's where I am going to sit on this very, very small edge of a building that's between empiricism and logic, right? So I love the arguments for, you know, the contingency argument, the kalam, all these stepping stones that we can use to get towards a argument for a specific God model. And they are logical as can be. I, for some reason, am convinced when there's the premises within these logical arguments are backed by empirical data. And it seems like, oh, well, Justin, that means that you're just an empiricist, that you require empirical data for these claims, which I really don't want to. I can see how they're reasonable. I can see how they're logical without having to use empirical data. But for me to be full-fledged, this is what's true definitively, you know, no questions about it. I think that empirical data might need to be within that. And I just need
Justin, what do you think? What do you think of what do you think of what I told you last time about these arguments, these cosmological arguments, being empirical in nature anyway? Because we are looking at empirical data to infer something about the fundamental layer of reality. So, what do you think about that?
So, what do you mean by? Well, we're observing and examining things within our reality, which would be empirical data. The correlation that's made, which me and you have had, I think the most frustrating conversation that I've had with you, Abdul, when it comes to trying to get me to understand these things, is when we spent like 3 hours on you trying to convince me that causality is presupposed. That was one of the hardest things that I had to do, was bite the bullet on causality being presupposed. Everything is just simply a correlation. So with that, it's almost like when I'm teaching my kids to question everything, and then I tell my kids to go clean the room and they say why, and I just want to be like, because I said so. Like, just go do it. I said to go do it, so just go do it.
Question everything apart from my authority.
Exactly.
What about like what if I ask you, do we observe contingent things?
We do observe contingent things. I would. Yeah.
And do those contingent things that we observe require an explanation external to themselves in order to account for their existence? An explanation that do these contingent things require an external explanation, an explanation that transcends the contingent thing itself in order to account for its existence?
Yeah, necessarily so.
So would you call that an empirical observation? Because if we're going to go back to what empiricism is, empiricism is basically knowledge through experience, or through sensual experience, right? Sensory experience. So in that sense, that our observation of contingent things that require an explanation, an external explanation, is something that is empirical. What would you say about that?
So I would agree that we're observing contingent empirical things. When it comes from where those empirical things derive from, we're no longer within empiricism anymore. So the thing that we're observing is empirically demonstrating its self's existence at that point. Now, trying to figure out where that came from, even though you're understanding that even if it's contingent, that you still need a explanation for it, because it's necessary, is because it's contingent. I would understand that. I'm just trying to find the causal link, like we talked about. What is the correlation that cannot be denied between this contingent thing that we're observing and the non-empirical thing that is the explanation for this?
Well, okay, so think of it this way. So we observe contingent things, right? And we have a let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's a presupposed notion of causality. And we attempt to explain these contingent things. So we attempt to explain the natural phenomena that we observe in the world, this empirical reality that we have, and then a series of explanations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the empirical part of the discussion, that contingent things require an explanation. Now, If you're asking how we can move from contingent things to a necessary thing,
Mhm.
well, okay, for me, one of the most obvious and direct ways, and Josh Rasmussen, he uses this argument, and I'm actually taking it from him, is that the totality of existent things, like all of existence, take the set of everything that exists, can that be dependent on something external to itself?
Okay. Say that last part again. You broke up a little bit.
Okay, so the totality of things that exist, everything that exists in reality, just everything, put it in a box, right? Everything that exists, can that totality of things be dependent on something external to it?
No.
Let me simplify it for you. Everything that exists means everything, literally. So there's nothing other than it, right?
Mhm.
So basically, if it were to depend on something external to itself, you would literally have to say that it depends on nothing.
Yeah, you can't do that. I mean,
Which is-
logically, you can't do that. Now, I can't show you that that's the case, but logically, that makes sense. And that's where I think.
I mean, I'm not sure what other than, I mean, what more than logic you would need, because like nothingness is just like it's definitionally obvious what nothingness entails. It entails nothing. It's literally the absence of anything. So so what I'm telling you is basically everything that exists within reality has nothing, literally nothing external to it. Because if there was something external to it, then it would be within the set of things that exist, right? Right? So everything that exists has to, by definition, be independent. Because if it was dependent on something, sorry, it has to be independent of external things. So because if it was dependent on something external to it, that means that it's not everything. That means there's something external. This is true by definition, right? So it's quite easy to show that there is an independent existence. You just have to take that set of everything that exists and show that it couldn't possibly depend on anything external to it because there is nothing external to it. So there is some form of independence. But then now we go back to the empirical reality that we observe and the contingent things. So the question is the totality of contingent things sufficient to explain the independence of contingent things? And I gave this example in the intro. Here's this glass of water right here. It's a contingent thing. Now you're observing one glass of water, so you naturally conclude that there is an external explanation that accounts for its existence. Now, if I had 100 glasses of water, you would still say that it requires something external to it to explain that set of
At least
glasses.
one external explanation.
Yes. And no matter how much you multiply that set of contingent things, it's still going to require an explanation external to it. Otherwise, you have some form of inconsistency. Why couldn't we just stop at the glass and say that it doesn't require an explanation, right? So in that sense, to conclude, the set of everything that exists is necessarily by definition independent. And in order to account for that independence, you need something other than the contingent things within the set to account for the independence of everything that exists. That means there is something within the set of everything that exists that forms a foundational necessary layer in order to support the rest of existence.
Correct.
So
and I agree with you. I agree with you all the way through with that. And that's, I'm sure you are familiar with PSR, the principle of sufficient reason.
Yeah.
Within my model of, hard determinism and materialism and all that stuff, I necessarily have to presuppose that. That is a presupposition that I hold. So there necessarily is an explanation for every contingent thing in the universe. Necessarily there has to be an explanation, or else it wouldn't make sense.
I mean, so what I gave you right now is basically it's definitionally true in the sense that if I told you that that all, what's the bachelor analogy? All bachelors are unmarried, right? That's an analytically true statement that doesn't require empirical evidence to back it, because you have within the statement the definition of what's being defined, the subject and the predicate, right? So it basically doesn't really make sense to ask for empirical evidence for something that is just definitionally true, and through this analytic reason on its own, I think I just showed you that we can very easily show that there is something within reality that is independent. And that's basically stage one of the contingency argument, which takes you to something necessary in reality. Reality couldn't have possibly existed unless there was a necessary foundation that accounted for it, even if you have an infinite series of things, of contingent things.
So at the very end there, you said something that's necessary within reality. What did you mean by that?
Within the set of existent entities, as in, I mean, if God exists, then God is within the set of entities that exist, right?
Yeah.
Right? So if we put all of existence in a set, God is going to be, if God does exist, then God will be in that set, right? So what I mean is, within everything that exists within that set, part of that has to be necessary in order for there to be any existence at all. Or you can say that the whole thing is necessary. Either way, it serves the purpose of the stage one of the cosmological, the contingency argument, that there is something necessary. Something exists also, by necessity.
That's something also that I'm looking into and kind of pondering is is everything within my model, is everything necessary? Because if I presuppose the PSR and hard determinism is true, everything that has happened and is happening and is going to happen has to be necessary for this reality to even be this reality.
Yeah, so there's a difference. I mean, when you talk about determinism and necessity, what you're basically saying is that there is a cause that necessarily determines its effect, right?
Yeah, that's
there's
not
no choice. There's no indeterminacy. That's not the same as saying that the chain itself is necessary, right?
Or the being, or a particular being within that chain is necessary. Because basically, necessary refers to the existence of something that cannot not exist. And so, if you're talking about determinism, and you're talking about a chain, which one thing necessarily leads to the other. These necessarily leading to the other thing, these things still perish. These things still come into being, and then they have existence, and then they leave being and have non-existence. So this is a different category. We're not talking about necessity in the same way.
You're talking about the existence, not the causation itself. The causation would be necessary. The existence is contingent.
Yeah, so there may be a necessary causal link between one thing and another, but that doesn't mean that any of these things are necessary existence. That is, they cannot not exist. If they cease to exist at any point, they're not necessary in the way that we're talking about them. If that makes sense.
So an example would be like let's say like a chair. Go ahead, Sharif.
No, I was going to say just the example of like a fire underneath the water. So the fire necessarily causes the water to boil under your model, I'm saying. But the fire doesn't have to exist and the water doesn't have to exist. So you still need an explanation as to why that particular link, those two links within the chain exist in the first place.
How'd the fire start? If the fire is contingent, how did the fire start? And that's when we get into a will. That's when we get into, static. Static just doesn't cause changes, to which that's where I've wanted to look, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't really dove into it yet. Still trying to have a more fundamental understanding, but diving into like quantum mechanics and things like that, or quantum physics. Speaking about like quantum fluctuations, like things that are considered purely random, which I still have a hard time within my model being able to grasp or understand, because there's nothing, everything is necessary. There is no randomness that's possible within my model.
Yeah, just going back to what Abdulrahman was saying at the beginning as well, it may be because it's relatively, new way to look at, a particular angle to look at this point of contingency. What Abdulrahman is in essence saying is that if you put all of existence into a bucket, then all things that exist cannot exist upon something outside of itself. There can't be something other than all those things that exist. So they have to be independent. So he's saying as a result, if all contingent beings can explain itself, then that becomes the independency. But all contingent things require an explanation outside of itself, and therefore you need a necessary being. So the necessary being provides the completeness of all things that don't need anything else to explain itself. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. No, I totally agree with that. Now, I think the one point to where we're going to have disagreement is that, and this goes back to the question I asked Abdulrahman, is what do you mean by something within reality? Because as of right now, I have an understanding that what's consistent within my model is that reality is that necessary explanation. Reality is the
I think there's the
thing.
distinction you need to know between the necessity of the causal chain, the deterministic causal chain, and between a necessary existence as we're using it in this contingency argument. So I think there's a bit of an equivocation going on. Let me give you an example of like a chair. So as a determinist, you would say that this chair couldn't have not existed because the antecedent events that preceded it led to its existence necessarily. However, the chair is still a contingent thing because you're going to like look for an explanation for why the chair exists in the first place. So there is a certain causal chain that leads to the existence of the chair. The fact that cause leads to effect deterministically doesn't mean that the causal chain had to exist. So I think it's important to point out what a necessary being means. A necessary being is a being that couldn't have failed to exist. You can imagine a world without the chair. It's just that on your model, the fact that the world happens to exist necessitates by cause and effect the existence of the chair. That doesn't mean that the world couldn't have not existed. It could have been very different. Unicorns could have existed. Chairs could have not existed. Possible things or contingent things are things that didn't have to exist, things that can go out of being. And I think even under your deterministic model, that would be the case. So I think there's a bit of an equivocation between the necessity of a causal chain on determinism and the way we're using necessary being as far as the contingency argument is concerned.
Do you mind if I just ask a question as well? So, in terms of a necessary existence, are you comfortable with that idea now? Or so you, in terms of step one, establishing that there is a necessary existence of some sort, you're fine with that?
The universe and everything that is contained within the universe cannot necessarily be eternal. There needs to have some type of necessary existence, or by necessary being, something that is.
Okay.
To explain it. We're there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
I mean, as far as we're concerned, you accepted this. I mean, you're not a theist. I mean, you can say what you just said and still be an atheist. I just don't want that to be a barrier for you accepting the stage one of the contingency argument. So you basically accept that stage one of the contingency argument is sound. You do believe that something necessary exists.
Now we can move on then from this, so we don't need to go into the contingency arguments anymore. So we've got you to a point.
I don't want to take up the rest of the show, man. If you got other guests,
no, it's fine.
You're just scared, Justin, that you're going to get to that conclusion.
If I was scared, we wouldn't be in our chats doing this every day for the last 8 months.
Oh, no, I'm joking.
Right, so you've established a necessary existence. Now, what is your opinion with regards to whether or not this existence has a will? That it has a will of its own, that it is self-determining?
That's kind of where we break off, is because, like I said, I haven't really studied quantum and determinacy. I'm saying that
quantum wouldn't relate to this.
Huh?
The quantum wouldn't relate to the necessary being. The quantum is the quantum of the.
So you're saying the quantum was within the contingency itself?
Yeah. Quantum is just the tiny parts of the contingent reality. So you're not going to get answers in terms of the necessary being with reference to the quantum. The quantum is only going to tell you about the fundamental nature of reality in terms of like what makes it up and how its parts relate. So with regards to the necessary existence, I'll just give you a short argument as to why I believe it's rational to consider this necessary being to have a will that's independent. Because if it's an independent being and there is nothing external to it acting upon it, because that's what dependency is. Dependency is there are things external to the dependent thing which the independent thing relies upon. Now, if you have an independent necessary existence, what we're saying here is there is nothing outside of it acting on it. There is no causal connection to something external to it acting upon it, leading to an effect. But effects come from it. All contingent things come from this necessary thing. The necessary thing is giving rise to everything in contingent existence. Now, I would say here that if contingent things are arising from this as a result of this necessary existence, that this must be self-determined. The necessary existence is choosing to bring things into existence. And it has to be coming from itself. It can't be coming from external to it, because then you're not talking about a contingent thing, a necessary thing anymore. That kind of language can only be used with reference to contingent existence. So if this thing is independent and you accept that, if this thing is necessary, then anything that comes from it has to have been self-determined by that necessary thing.
Self-determined, yes. Yeah. I agree with that.
So that is what I would refer to as a free will, and the ultimately free will.
So
the word free will doesn't go very well with
that's cringe. That's cringe.
Better to say will. I mean, you could just say will, some kind of
even that, because if what Yusuf just said was correct, that everything that comes from this necessary being is necessary itself. Would you agree with that?
Well, it's not necessary itself, because it could come into existence and it can perish.
Any decision or thing that you would call a choice that comes from this necessary being.
I wouldn't say it's necessary, no.
So okay. So those things are contingent. The decisions themselves are contingent.
Okay, so one way to look at this is, so the necessary thing exists as a foundation for the contingent world to exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, one way to look at this is in terms of sufficient cause, right? So if A is a sufficient cause for B, right, then as long as there is A, you will always have B.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're, and I think you're on your view, you're already finding it quite plausible that the contingent world is finite and not eternal. You mentioned that a while ago. If A always existed, which it has to because it's necessary, and it's a sufficient cause for B, then B would have always existed. So A being the necessary being and B being the contingent world, right? But if you already accept that the contingent world is finite and not eternal, then A has always been sufficient for B, but B didn't exist. That would be a problem. You would have to say that A always existed, but in a certain point in time, I mean, time comes with a lot of baggage here, but let's just use it loosely. For in a certain point in time, A brought about the existence of the necessary being brought about the existence of the contingent world, right? So there would have to be some kind of factor that would allow for something that always existed to bring, or something infinite or eternal to bring a finite effect into being.
Yes.
If there wasn't a factor of choice, then as long as A existed, B will exist. As long as the necessary foundation existed, the contingent world would exist.
Why does this necessary being necessarily need free will? Why wouldn't he just need a type of will that causes things into existence contingently with just knowledge that he was going to do it? If he's eternal and all-knowing, if he holds those two omni properties, what's stopping him from just having a perfect will instead of free will to cause these things into existence?
So it isn't a barrier, let's forget about free will for now. So let's just say will is sufficient.
Okay.
So
let's just say will is sufficient.
The thing is I don't see why. I can get when maybe you have an issue when we're talking about contingent things, why you might have an issue with using the word free, or like in an absolute sense for us. But with regards to a necessary being that is independent and there is nothing like limiting it, there's nothing preventing it from acting or getting in the way, like things do for us. Like I might have this desire to just start flying now, but I don't have a jetpack nearby. There's no plane I've got access to at the moment.
Yeah,
I have things limiting me, and that's to do with my own ability, my own power, my own resources, things like that. Now, God has all of these. He's in infinite quantity, so he has infinite power. Like he's all powerful. He's all knowledgeable. He's got these things, these attributes that are not, that like he's basically able to act whenever he wants, however he wants, without that being impeded by anything. So how much more free can you get than that? Like what do you consider a free will? Like I get you're a determinist.
The ability to choose otherwise.
Okay, so what would be stopping this necessary being from choosing otherwise?
His knowledge.
His knowledge would prevent him from choosing otherwise?
If he's eternal and all-knowing.
Yep.
All-knowing within the framework that I understand it is that he would know everything, including his own quote-unquote decisions. If he already knows his own decisions, and his own decisions are part of his when it comes to his knowledge, his omniscience, then to say that he could do otherwise than he knows he's going to do would take away his omniproperty as all-knowing.
Yeah, but I think the problem with that, Justin, is that I think you're mixing between free will and the idea of doing otherwise. Yeah.
Yes. So it's well.
I'm just saying
that's how I define choice, and choice is the ability to choose otherwise. And free will within the way we're not talking about libertarian free will, like the Christians like to argue for. Like,
yeah,
I would always ask them to jump off of a building and have the free will to grow a set of wings and fly away.
But I think
we're not talking about that kind of free will.
But what Yusuf is arguing for is not saying could this creator, this necessary being, do otherwise other than its own knowledge of what it was going to do in the first place. He's just simply saying that is the ability to choose bound by anything external to the necessary being?
Not external to it, but I would say it's bound by something within that necessary being, which I think then we can agree.
Yeah. Whatever is internal to the, because at the end of the day, there's only so much that our mind can get to in terms of the necessary being. But all we need to get to is the fact that this necessary being is not some naturalistic or physical explanation. Yeah, it's a necessary being that has sentience. Yeah, has an idea, has knowledge or awareness. That's all we want to get to. Now, how the necessary being creates, why he creates, what the will is, how it interacts, that's a separate discussion.
Yeah.
But at the very least, we can get to that point that there is a will. Yeah, I think Abdulrahman has mentioned it as well, which is that the cause, the necessary being, is eternal, but the contingent realities that exist, they're finite. Yeah, so if you've got everything necessary to produce a contingent reality or the effect, but the effect is temporal, had a beginning, but the cause is eternal, then the only explanation to that is choice. Yeah, intentionality, to choose. Yeah, it can't be naturalistic, it can't be some sort of physical force out there that has to create. So that therefore cannot be explained under the model of naturalism, but it can be explained under the model of the will. And that's the only explanation that we have. That's one. The second argument would be the fact that when we talk about contingent beings, we're saying these are things that could have a number of possibilities. They could exist, they could not exist. They could have different attributes than the way that they exist. So therefore, there requires a choice to be made in order to determine why they exist this way as opposed to any other way. Yeah. So therefore, that again gives us an explanation. And by the way, all of these arguments are all built upon the reality. They're built upon what we sense. They're not built upon anything outside, some philosophical note. They actually built upon what we sense. We sense things exist and they could exist in another way, and they required an explanation, for its existence. And from that, we're coming to, and we sense that the universe is temporal, has a beginning to its existence, and we've already agreed upon a necessary being, then the only explanation we've got now is a necessary being that has a will. It is just the logical entailment.
I'm not sure how much longer you want to keep going, Justin, but there's or if anyone's waiting, but
we'll keep going until he says his shahada.
Right.
There are other pathways as well. Like, for example, when you think of an ultimate explanation and the necessary foundation of reality, I think, like, from an epistemic viewpoint, you want the least arbitrary explanation, the least arbitrary ultimate explanation there is. Like, for example, if I told you that the necessary foundation of reality had a power of 86, for example, right? Well, then we can ask the question, why isn't the power 87? Why isn't it 85? Why that arbitrary limit? I mean, there is an aspect of contingency there. We're going to have to ask a question that requires a deeper explanation, and you don't want that with the ultimate explanation of reality. So, and I think scientists often look for these kinds of ultimate explanations as well, and arbitrariness isn't a good thing for an ultimate explanation of reality, because then you're left with a lot of contingencies that require deeper answers. So what is the least arbitrary necessary foundation of reality? Well, you have to think of its causal capacity. What kind of causal capacity does it have? Again, what number are you going to put on that isn't arbitrary? What nature does it have? What kind of causal capacities does it have? So, for example, we have a will. That you can call that a causal capacity, however you're going to define will. Even if you're going to reduce it to causal factors or to physical factors, then it's still a causal power. So does the nature of the foundation of reality have the same causal capacity that you do, or is that going to be another arbitrary limitation on its causal capacity? Because if you have it and it doesn't, then why that arbitrary limitation? That means it's bound by certain limitations. So the way you want to look at it is in terms of supremacy. You want to think of the most supreme nature for the foundation of reality, because in that sense, I mean, the word supreme might come with a lot of theistic negative. Exactly, unlimited is better because when I say supreme, you're thinking of God, and I don't want your mind to jump there, because that can be a barrier sometimes when we're talking to atheists. But the most non-arbitrary nature of the fundamental aspect of reality is going to be something that's unlimited. And if you're going to limit its causal capacity to mere physical interactions, well, then you have a lot of contingencies that, again, require a deeper explanation. So in a sense, I mean, there's another question that Robert Koons asks, right? He's like, what kind of an epistemic limitation are we going to place on science, right? Like when we observe contingent things in the world, we always want an explanation for these contingent things. And the job of science, among other fields, is to give us explanations about these observable phenomena. But the question is, what's the epistemic limitation of science? Where are we going to stop? Where are we going to say that that's it? Science is going to go no further? Because remember, you can't really, first of all, you can't observe causality. Second of all, there's always going to be the possibility of unobservable things that you haven't explained, right? So what's the most non-arbitrary epistemic limitation to science? Well, we could say that science can explain contingent things, but the necessary foundation of reality shouldn't have that kind of arbitrariness, because if you have that arbitrary limitation on the necessary foundation, then science has to come back and do some more work to give us even a deeper foundation. But the foundation of reality shouldn't have a foundation. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth to have about this, but there are a lot of pathways that indicate that an arbitrary a necessary foundation with some sort of an arbitrary nature isn't something that looks very pretty. Let's just put it that way. You're always going to want a deeper explanation.
Just to briefly summarize that point. I mean, all Abdulrahman is saying is that if you're saying that the necessary being is forced to create, then that is a limitation. It's another limitation that you're placing,
Mhm.
and you're going to ask the question, why is it forced? As opposed to having the ability to choose. And the better way, the freer, the unrestricted way would be to say choose. See, Justin, I'm just thinking every single argument from a rational point of view, built upon our observation of the universe and reality, keeps coming back to the same conclusion.
Yes, but the question that Abdul was mentioning was that how far does science go before we can say that this is outside of the bounds of science? Now, that's the fascinating thing about science itself, is that I don't know if we'd ever be able to say this is the line. This is the line that we draw. Like right now, we would draw the line at anything that transcends space, time, and matter is no longer within the bounds of science. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm not an empiricist, because
It's just
there are
anything that you
conceptual
can't do
things.
experiments on.
I'm not sure I agree with that, Justin. I mean, you don't think there are in principle limitations with regard to science, like, for example, things that are beyond observation. I mean, how is
Well,
that?
yeah, that's no. That's what I just said. Yeah, so I agree with that. Anything that
Yeah.
transcends space, time, and matter is outside the bounds of science. Now, there may be a scientific method that may come about in the future, and I don't know. I really don't. That can observe things that are outside of space, time, and matter. There may be a different method that's based upon things that are more conceptual rather than empirical.
Well, if it can observe it, then it's observable. So, I mean, I don't. I mean, there are things. I mean, I think it's indisputable that there are, and I think like philosophers and scientists in general would agree, and the philosophy of science is a big field, that there are things that are not within the purview of science, like morality, for example. I mean, that's a kind of mundane example because we're talking about the concrete reality. But just as an example, like moral truths and stuff, that's not really a scientific question, although it can be related to science.
Earlier with the brother that we had on earlier, I gave the example of the internal angles of a triangle adds up to 180 degrees. Now, you don't investigate from a scientific point of view as to why it adds up to 180 degrees. You say that it is self-contained within its own existence. Yeah. So
how it ends up being 180 degrees, you can show the internal angles. You could take a protractor and actually show what the angles are, but why they became that way, that's something that's not for science, it's more philosophical.
Yeah, it's just because the reason why is because it's contained in its own existence, isn't it? So it's necessary from that point of view on a flat surface, obviously. So what we're saying here is that science. So if somebody now comes to me and says, well, maybe in future science will investigate and find a reason why, well, it's irrelevant. Yeah, that's not the purpose of science. Science is fundamentally about understanding contingent realities and the explanations of contingent realities. Why are they contingent realities? Is because you can't work out the answer by its own existence and by its own definition. Yeah. So I have to sense it. I have to observe it for myself in order to work out why it exists. That's why, when we talk about causality, that causality is something that cannot be determined, a priori between two things. Yeah. What I mean by that is that you can't work out, just by knowing the nature of fire and the nature of water, the boiling point of water. It's not contained in its own definition. I have to experience it, yeah, because there's no logical necessity for it to boil at 100 degrees Celsius, yeah, like the internal angles of a triangle is logically necessary to be 180 degrees. So there's nothing necessary. So for me to have knowledge of it, I need to experience it. This is the point of science, is about you experiencing contingent realities. Does that make sense, Justin? You have to experience. If something is not necessary from a philosophical and logical point of view, then you're going to have to use science to come to its conclusion.
If something doesn't make sense philosophically?
No, if it's not necessary from a philosophical or logical point of view, then you're going to have to come to use science in order to have some knowledge of it.
Those are the only two methods that we really currently have right now.
Which is what, sorry?
To reason with. Either observation through empirical means or logical arguments through philosophical conversation.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is this, is that where we can delineate between the two is if we've got a argument that is contained within its premises and contained within its definitions that lead to a conclusion, then we don't need to investigate further. Yeah, we don't need to now experience it. But if it's not contained within its own definition or within its own existence, then I have to experience it, which means I have to do science. Yeah. So if I wanted to, like I said, the boiling point of water, I want to know what it is. There's no way of me investigating other than by experience. Yeah, I can't work it out. If I wanted to know whether white light is a mixture of different lights, yeah, red, blue, green, the rainbow colors, or not, there's no way of me working it out from a philosophical point of view because it's not contained in its own definition. I have to go and experience it. Yeah, I have to do an experiment. Yeah, so this is where science works. So when we're talking about, okay, outside of the universe or a necessary being, then we're saying this is an area where science cannot work. It's not even an area by which we would ask the question for which science is looking for. Because we're talking about a necessary being, self-contained within its own definition.
That makes
sense.
sense.
Once I've come to the conclusion that it's self-contained with its own definition, that's it. I don't need to look at science. Science is never going to negate that as a conclusion. I think
also
Justin's telling off his kid.
Yeah, I think he's had enough. But just one last thing, Justin. I think science is great and everything. I don't think anyone would disagree. But I think you might be overestimating or exaggerating the epistemic value of science, in the sense that it works great when it comes to observable things and when it comes to us understanding the mechanisms of reality. But I mean, I think I spoke to you about inductive pessimism, right? That most of our science in the past, most of our best scientific theories in the past have proven to be wrong. So by induction, which is the same method we use in science, some would say that it's probable that our current scientific theories are wrong. And I'm sure you don't have a problem with that. But the issue is, I mean, taking that into consideration, it's strange saying that you would want this logical, rational, sound deduction to be backed by a field that is constantly changing. And it's good that it's changing. I'm not criticizing science here. And it's a self-correcting system, which is great. But the problem is, I think when it comes to the deeper metaphysical questions, you're looking at a very clear, rational pathway to something that seems reasonably plausible, but you're asking for validation from a field that, first of all, isn't very relevant, although it might be to a certain extent, like when you talk about stuff like fine-tuning arguments or design arguments or whatever.
Yeah.
But not just that, but I think the question of the epistemic value of science should come into play as well, because, how certain are we about scientific theories? And that's a huge philosophical questions that we can ask, really.
Mm-hmm. I think where I'm at right now is that I would need something compelling to believe in an unembodied mind of some sort. And I don't know if
don't think of it
for will is cutting it.
Okay, so don't think of it like don't jump the gun. Don't think of it in terms of an unbodied mind. Just think of it in terms of things that exist, because we can't really conceptualize what this necessary foundation of reality is. Because when you say unbodied mind, what does that mean? Are you picturing something? I don't think you are.
I'm picturing. I'm not picturing something anthropomorphized, which I don't want to blaspheme or anything like that, because you guys don't
Yeah, I get that. There is
Allah
some...
like they do with Jesus and Christianity. Like, I know you guys don't do that.
Yeah, but that's again, what I'm saying is when you're thinking of a disembodied mind, we're still talking about a concrete reality. So it's going to depend on what you mean by body. Even when we're saying non-physical, well, what do we mean by
a mind
physical?
that exists outside of a physical brain?
Well,
yeah, but
again,
all you're saying is you're trying to work out a mind that exists other than the mind of a human being.
Now this may
matter.
very well be a black swan fallacy that I'm committing right here. It very well may be.
No, but I'm trying to talk about a more foundational point, and that when we talk about even the nature of the physical reality, we talk about these ontological things like what is the physical reality. These are huge questions that we're not really certain about what we're talking about. So when you postulate like an alternate reality and you say it's disembodied, well, what do you really mean? I think, to cut to the chase, what we're basically saying is that it's just unlike the rest of the contingent world. It's just categorically unlike it. But what it means for something to be disembodied, I'm not sure. I don't know. But we are talking about a concrete reality. We're not talking about something abstract that has a mind. We're talking about a concrete reality that has a causal capacity on the contingent world or the world it produces. So I'm honestly not sure what disembodied mind means. I would just say a mind unlike ours. I mean, that's what I would say.
And also, just as a point, isn't it? There are philosophers of the mind who believe in panpsychism. You know, this idea that all existence has a level of consciousness, even an electron or a proton. So if we're talking about, you know, even from a panpsychist point of view, because the reason why the panpsychist as well, by the way, is because they can't explain how matter produces consciousness. So they say consciousness must be a fundamental brute fact of reality. So everything has a level of consciousness. The more complex the matter, the more complex the consciousness. That's just the argument. Now, even under that point of view, which is another way of looking at the mind, and has certain, you know, positions, then a necessary being would be a reality that would also have a consciousness, a mind.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that. I agree with what you just said.
You agree?
Allah Akbar. You said that you said that a necessary existence is a reality.
Yeah, it's
a
reality.
Agree with that.
Yeah, it's a concrete. What we mean by reality is that it exists. It's not an abstract notion.
So now we agree that the necessary being is a reality.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
Now we have to figure out if that reality has a will. That's where the hang up is.
Okay, that's kind of what we've been discussing, but I think we can take it further in future discussions as well.
We'll have that discussion next time, inshallah. God
Absolutely.
We'll leave it there. Say inshallah, Justin.
Inshallah.
We'll leave it there for the time being, just because we've got a couple of brothers that have been waiting for a little bit. But again, it's always a pleasure having you on, Justin. And maybe not today, but
hopefully one of these times I won't have a little gremlin running around.
And hopefully as well, one of them you will be hearing Ashhadu Allah ilaha illallah.
maybe not. My daughter is Christian, so even though me and my wife are atheist, we're not stopping our kids from pursuing religious religious beliefs. So he's free to believe what he wants.
So are you? Oh wait! I thought no one was free. I thought you were determined.
Go!
He's free. Free in the sense that we are going to.
Free in the sense we're not free.
We're going to play along with the illusion of free will.
All right. Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure anyway, Justin, and we'll see you next time, inshallah.
Take care, man.
Take care, man. Bye. All right. Before we go, the next guest we're going to have on is someone called Saleh. But before we bring him on, there was another brother that was on, and then he disappeared. But he asked this question, so I thought maybe we could respond to it because I don't think it's going to take too long. So he said, "How do you guys define rationality?" This is in the private chat, by the way. When you say rationality, can God prove? When you say rationality can prove God, does this mean God's existence depends on rationality? And then if rationality can be used to prove God's existence, can rationality be used to disprove God's existence? So with regards to defining rationality, personally, I would just say that rationality is just the method or the attribute in which a human being uses in order to determine things that necessarily connect logically. So that you make a statement premise 1, you make a statement premise 2. There's a connection between them that necessarily leads to a conclusion, or if that's deductive, or inductively, you're saying it's most probably, or there's some level of probability in terms of its inference to a conclusion. So yeah, rationality is just this attribute that humans have. They look out into the world and they think upon things, and they try to discover truth through it. With regards to saying if you can prove God rationally, does that mean God's existence depends on rationally? No, just in the same way as if you can prove rationally that Abdul murdered Sharif, for example, that doesn't mean that the existence of any of these or the existence of that murdering occurring was dependent on your ability to rationally prove that. Being rationally proving something is independent from something being dependent on that for its existence. Like it doesn't follow that you proving something rationally means that the thing that you've proved depends on the tool in which you've used to prove it. It's a big jump. So I'd say that with regard to that. And the last bit I would say was contradictory. So if you can prove rationally that God exists, then I would say that it's necessarily the case. You can't prove rationally that he doesn't exist, because if you've already proved, we're talking in an absolute sense here, you've already proved that God does exist and you've done so rationally, then you can't say that he doesn't exist, or you can't then argue and prove rationally that he doesn't, because then you'll have these two separate things that are conflicting with one another. Is there anything else? Oh, Saleh's gone. He was here a second ago.
I'd say a rational belief is basically something that comports to reality, and yeah, of course, God doesn't depend on these rational arguments. It's just an epistemic tool that takes us to the necessary foundation. And also, I think you can use rational tools to try and disprove the existence of God, but obviously, I think they ultimately fail. Because, as Brother Yusuf put it, if in the absolute sense, if you actually prove that God exists, then whatever rational route you take to disprove that proposition is going to ultimately fail.
If you want to add anything, just try and make it short as well.
Is Saleh here, or is he?
Yes, he is. Yeah. Should we just
bring him on, and then I'll just a few points, isn't it? Firstly, I think using rational arguments for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not something which is absent from the Quranic text and the Quranic methodology. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran itself calls upon us to use our minds to come to the conclusion about the signs for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like in Surah Al-Imran verse 190, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لِآيَاتِ لِلْأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, in the alternations of night and day, these are signs for a people of thinking, people of depth of thought. So we shouldn't think this is something strange or unusual in terms of using our mind to come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. This is something that the Quran itself encourages us to do, and there's a lot to be said about that. But I think inshallah that Saleh is on. Just really quickly as well, Jake had to leave. He had a prior appointment that he had to be on, so that's the reason why Jake's not on the show. We didn't kick him off on this. He had to unfortunately leave. But yeah, inshallah. So I don't know if Saleh wants to raise a comment or question or criticism. Bismillah.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. How are you? All good?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Sorry, I'm driving, so I kept on waiting on the backstage, so that's why I'm
Yeah.
No problem. Sorry for keeping you waiting so long as well. I know you've been sat there patiently for a while. So
it was a very nice discussion actually with Justin. I'm very eager to know how it will end actually, and And really, I'm a kind of person that I think if you just read the Quran without such a rational arguments, anything, if he kept on reading the Quran, I think he might maybe Allah, inshallah, will give him hidayah, inshallah.
Open his
Inshallah.
heart.
So my question is regarding the argument from Fitra. I don't see much. I don't know whether Western philosophers talked about the argument from Fitra. I just heard about that there are some papers talking about that babies are born with some sort of prior knowledge and all of this. So my question is there any argument that because we as Muslims, we take the argument from Fitra for the existence of God is a very strong argument, right? If I'm not mistaken. So what do you think? Do we have such a strong argument that we can talk with atheists about regarding this argument on there is a prior knowing of God existing, regardless of rationality, regardless of anything?
Yeah, so
Sorry, go on, Yusuf. Sorry.
No, go on. You go first, bro.
No, I was going to say it really depends how we define fitra in this context. Yeah, so because we could argue fitra here could mean the ability to make rational decisions, or it could mean the aspect of the belief in one creator, one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's rational ways by which we can articulate the argument of fitra as an indicator for the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So one argument used, and there's a brother who's actually written a paper on this recently, brother Dr. Safaruk Chowdhury, and he's talked about the idea that human beings are born with rational capacity, the ability to think. The ability to think cannot itself come about by naturalistic causation, and it has to be ultimately given to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through direct information. Like, for example, when Adam alayhi salam was given names of things, that was the foundational concept from which we'll now be able to make thoughts. So he uses this argument. Similarly, another argument that's used is this idea that the idea of God, the concept itself, is not something that is built upon what we see. Everything that we normally think about is ultimately built upon a contingent reality. Yeah. So if I talk to you about the color mauve, if you've never seen the color mauve before, you wouldn't know what it is. So you have to see everything or experience something or hear about something that you've experienced in order to understand that. Now, the concept of an unlimited necessary being or God is not something that's in the reality, in the contingent reality. So that idea itself must be something that has been given to us, because it's not an idea that we can automatically develop. So that's one argument. And the final argument, I think, was the paper that was it Yusuf that put up, which is that the idea that all children, all human beings are born with this innate desire to worship, and worship a creator, and that we see this across all civilizations, across all times, and even atheists, have written about how atheists themselves, although claiming to be atheists, actually still have this innate desire, not just innate desire, but actually this innate belief in God.
So what you're referencing there as well is that they were asked to call upon God's wrath, and they would react nervously. So despite proclaiming the non-belief in God, they would get this sense of fear in them when they would call upon God to curse them or punish them or anything like that. And it was specifically this idea of God as well. Like they didn't get the same kind of reaction if they did it with Santa Claus or these things that they do believe or know, for example, don't exist. Whereas there's a distinct reaction that they get when talking with regards to God. Now the article that I was sharing, which I'll pull back up now, is this one. So it's Religion is Natural by Paul Bloom. Paul Bloom is himself, I think, an atheist. I found an article somewhere where he was being interviewed and he referred to himself as one. That was, I don't know when that was exactly. Maybe, inshallah, he's talking his shahada since then. But it's a really, really good article. It's very short. It's only, I think, maybe 4 pages, if that. And it's called Religion is Natural. Paul Bloom, Department of Psychology, Yale. And it goes into basically the evidence for that refutes this idea that all religious beliefs are inherited or given by their parents. So there's a particular bit here titled "Is Religion Natural?" and it goes into it a little bit, and it talks about this idea of common sense dualism, that from a very early age, children, even if they're born with atheist parents, they have this idea of dualism. That is, they've got this concept of a soul, and that the soul lives on, and that it's not. And they also have this overarching sense of attributing agency and design to creation, or to the world, and so they can't help but see things in terms of their purpose. And they see everything as having this purpose in it. And again, this isn't something that's necessarily taught to them. And this idea of a being of some sort, or a creator. And it's really good. So if you get the chance, I really recommend reading that. And it just kind of it dismisses this idea that there isn't an innate belief. I think people do really have this as a huge part of their being, and atheism itself requires a lot of effort. And when I say a lot of effort, I don't mean that it's rationally justified at the end of it. It's just you've got to try to explain away so much in order to get to that position, and then to sustain it. And then again, I'll always bring this up, and I love bringing it up.
But sorry,
no, go on, go on. It's okay.
Can you use such an argument with atheists? I mean, I've never watched. Maybe when we're talking with atheists regarding this such. I don't think we just come out with this argument. I don't think it's used a lot with when talking and trying to convince atheists with God.
Do you think the atheist?
I think Saleh, the problem, Salah, sorry, the problem is that atheists, they will try to explain it on the basis of evolution, that there was an evolutionary trait, and that this allowed human beings to form social bonds, and therefore promoted survival of the species. So that's what they try and argue. And so you have to then say, okay, fine. You're claiming this, one, let's see the evidence to try to justify. That's just an explanation. And secondly, then you have to maybe give further explanation. So I had the similar discussion with another atheist, going very close. Yeah, but the problem with atheists is that they have a lot of emotional baggage when it comes to religion. Many of them have left Christianity or some other religion like Jehovah's Witness or Mormonism, and they reject the religion, and they think that means reject all religions, and all belief claims, Now I explained to him, a rational argument for the existence of a necessary being, a creator who has a will, and he agreed. Initially, he agreed. He sort of slightly gone back on it, and then I explained to him. I said, "Look, within every human being, there is this natural fitra to want to worship a creator," and he agreed upon that because I explained. Said, look, we can look across all civilization, all cultures, all different times, and they've all worshipped something. Even communist societies have worshipped things, even though they reject belief in God. They venerate their leaders. They preserve them in mausoleums, etc. So we can see that there is a desire within human beings that's not just simply developed from a particular civilization or culture. Because if it was just from a particular civilization, that like we learned it from our parents, then other civilizations will be completely atheist. Be natural. So he accepted that. So then I linked the two together. I said, look, if you accepted that there's a necessary being who created the universe, who's unlimited, independent, who had a will, who chose to create the universe, then everything that exists within this universe, every contingent thing, including ourselves, ultimately relies upon their existence upon the creator. And that means that every aspect within us, one of which is this innate desire to worship, is ultimately created by the creator. So even if you want to bring in evolution or whatever, the argument is that even that process of evolution would have to be dependent upon the creator. So you agreed upon that. So I said, therefore, there's intentionality behind the fitra of a human being, or the innate desire to worship. And that intentionality is from the creator. That means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us with a desire to worship. So therefore, it would become rational if we've concluded that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, that we would seek out worship from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we're created with that desire, and that can only be satisfied when Allah tells us, or the Creator tells us, how to worship. We can't work it out for ourselves because our minds are limited and we don't know what the Creator wants from us in terms of worship. So he agreed upon that, and I think that's where, when you talk to atheists, if you just start off with the fitra argument in and of itself, they will try and dismiss it by other explanations. But if you fit it in, then it becomes a very strong argument, because it's no longer like a deistic view of God. You know, deism, the idea that God exists but doesn't influence the universe, or ourselves. Rather, it becomes a very theistic view of God, a creator that exists, and we are there to worship the creator. So I think that's where it helps, inshallah.
Inshallah, yeah. So I think we're just closing the session. So thank you very much, brothers, and we'll hope you see you soon, inshallah.
Inshallah. In next 2 weeks, inshallah, we'll take on another topic and maybe return to this topic as well.
Inshallah. It was a pleasure having you on, bro. And thank you for your questions. Assalamu alaikum.
Salah, whereabouts are you from?
So I'm from Egypt, and I live in the Gulf now, but my home country is Egypt. Yeah.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Abdulrahman is Egyptian as well.
Yes.
So good to hear that.
Good talking to you, man.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. So we've got Brother Mo L on, and then I think we've got the hidden guy in the background. He wants to come on and say a few words as well.
Yeah.
So we'll get him on the stream in a moment, but first let's get Brother Mo L on. Assalamu alaikum, Mo.
Alaikum salam. How you guys doing?
Alhamdulillah. How are you, bro?
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I just want to add like my 2 cents real quick. I won't stay too long, and I want to just the question is, can God be proven rationally? Now, obviously, the door swings both ways in that question. Can atheists even prove that they're rational to begin with? Because how can they account for their rational faculties as a question, a philosophical question? And at the end of the day, to be frank with you, is based on worldviews and our presuppositions, because you cannot escape first principles. You know what I mean? Especially in philosophy. So which worldview is more coherent? Because that's what philosophy asks for. Coherence at the end of the day. Is it monotheism, naturalism, panpsychism, pantheism? You know what I mean? And this is what we're looking for, coherence, And there are arguments like Abdulrahman and Brother Yusuf and also Jake, they talked about the contingency, kalam, design, all these a posteriori type of arguments. There's also arguments, a priori arguments, like consciousness, rationality, and even fitra, by the way, because at the end of the day, through our fitra, our innate disposition, our intuition, this is how we accept axioms, if that even makes sense, accept the self-evident truth. That we're rational human beings who can engage in disciplines like math, science, and philosophy, and so on. So at the end of the day, what makes the most sense? Monotheism or atheism? This is all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I was going to mention it. No, sorry. I was going to mention it before as well. I love the double-edged sword that you put forward to the naturalist that says we came from random processes that is fundamentally unconscious, and if that's the case, you've got this issue that you need to deal with. We evolved. And this question of did we Did we evolve due to a truth-focused process? Like, is truth going to give rise to the likelihood that you'll survive? And if they answer yes, necessarily so, then they've got to explain how the most rational, the most successful being happens to be throughout its history mostly religious. Like every civilization all has this belief in a transcendental higher power, in the supernatural, in life after death, in a soul, and in judgment, in justice, in these concepts. And you have to explain that. Like if these concepts were have a root in truth, How is it that we are the most dominant species on the planet? If if you're going to hold on to this idea that evolution developed, with a focus on truth, and the more truthful something is, the more successful something's going to be. Therefore, if you've got the most successful being on there, the thing that seems to set it apart from everything else has to have a higher degree of truth. And the other issue is if you say, well, no, it's not truth focused. It's all random. It's just these illusions are that can give rise to survival, and we happen to have just really successful illusions. It's like, well, then is science not
self-defeating?
A part of this? Does it not conflict with the whole mission that science is trying to push? If we are fundamentally
aimed to seek to survive, not to seek truth,
then
aim to only.
I think Mo.
Yes, go ahead.
Mo, you were. I think you were talking about a very fundamental point. I think we need to do a whole stream on arguments from reason, right? That's a huge topic on its own. All the way from C.S. Lewis's argument from reason to Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism. I mean, that needs to stream on its own. But you also spoke about fitra, and I wanted to just touch on that very briefly because me personally, I'm undecided on. I understand there are various definitions of what fitra is, mainly two, that it's a knowledge, innate knowledge that we're born with, or a predisposition to believe in God through knowledge, or through gaining knowledge through experience. And we know there's this whole debate between two schools of epistemology, rationalism and empiricism, and there's something there that might be relevant. So rationalists, just very briefly, say that there are some things. They don't deny empiricism, but they say that there are some things that we know innately, and what it really boils down to, the debate, is that at the very least, like when we're observing kids and kids are playing and learning things through experience, we can tell that what they come to know is through experience. However, at the very foundation of our knowledge, there is a huge assumption, and that huge assumption is the predictability of the future. That's something that you cannot learn through experience. And there's really no two ways about this, because if you say that I learn about the predictability of the future through my experience, well, then you have to be presuming that your experience of predictability is going to be repeated in the future. I mean, there's really no way about it. There's no way around it. That our drive towards truth, which is based on this foundation of predictability or the orderness of the world, is something that is undoubtedly innate, right? I mean, something that we cannot learn through experience. Whether we consider that as knowledge or not, that's a huge debate, because, I mean, let's not go into that, but a lot of people say it can't be considered as knowledge. It's just an innate drive. But even so, I think that's on the second understanding of what fitra is. If we say that this innate predisposition that drives us towards truth is necessarily going to take us to God based on these arguments we're having, because these rational arguments are based on this presupposition. So I think it's a very good understanding of fitra. Not that the other one isn't valid, I don't know, but the fact that we are predisposed towards truth is I think undeniable, and we don't learn that through experience. That is necessarily innate. I mean, I don't think that's disputable.
Definitely. So Jazakallah khair for that interesting little line of thought there, Mo. We're going to try to wrap up now. We've got one more person that wants to say something. So he's the secret sneaky guy that sits in the back doing the modding.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can you guys hear me?
Wa alaikum salam
wa rahmatullah.
Yes, we can hear you.
How are you, brothers?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So I just want to kind of big up Mustahsin, as mashallah, he does a bit of work behind the scenes, and you don't see him that often, but he's in the chat doing his thing and helping with the admin stuff. And also, I want to do a shout out to Brother Criterion on Twitter. If you go to our Twitter page for this channel, which I'll bring up now. It's at T_A_podcast. If you go into the bio, you'll see basically the names of everyone, and the Criterion is the one who does all the aesthetics. So the pretty logo, the background, the posters, the thumbnails, all of these things are done by him. May Allah bless him. So yeah, Jazakallah khair to the hidden brothers in the background. Just wanted to say that. So thank you for what you do. Yeah. So go, bro. You wanted to say a few things.
Yeah, and the brother that came on before, he was speaking about the fitrah and like how we can prove rationally not like the fitrah exists. And obviously, you cited an academic study. What was it, by Paul Bloom? Religion is not.
Yeah.
So obviously, for me, when I look at this topic, how can we show the fitrah exists? There's obviously different angles you can obviously look at this. So generally, the Quran itself points to the argument. The ayah in the Quran which Allah is talking about. When you're in danger and you naturally call out to Allah, oh my God, and you call out to Allah, like, in danger. That is itself obviously enough proof that we do have this innate belief in the Creator, right? Because obviously in danger, why do we call out? Even the atheist will call out to the Creator. Obviously, that's not the only proof, but what I wanted to get at mainly was this. So basically, there was an academic study, obviously, that was conducted by Dr. Justin Barrett, Dr. Oliver Petrovich, Dr. Paul Bloom, and several other, obviously, academics. I want to mention something particular. So Dr. Oliver Petrovich, she's an anthropologist, and so what she did was she went to Japan, and even British children as well. And so what she was showing them, this is an actual experiment that took place. So she was showing detailed pictures of like natural phenomenon and man-made objects, right, to these Japanese children, right? Now, bear in mind, in Japan, before the experiment actually began, the people were actually saying to her, why are you even doing this experiment? They don't even believe in God, so they're going to say no. So what's interesting is what she was doing is she was showing these natural objects and man-made objects to these children. And then she gave them 3 choices, basically, of each of these, the origin, basically, of the natural phenomenon. And I think the 3 choices exactly, one was obviously God made it, and another one I think was humans made it, and another one might have been, I don't know what the third exact choice is, but basically, in a nutshell, all the children answered God made it. And she was like, literally, she said herself, this was probably the most significant finding, when their parents, all of them were atheists, right? So the question is, and she herself wondered, where do these children get the idea that creation is in God's hands, right? So all these children, and she also, I'm actually reading out here, my Japanese research assistants kept telling me, we Japanese don't think about God as a creator. It's just not part of Japanese philosophy. So it is wonderful when these children said, God made it, right? Even when their parents were atheists. And in fact, Dr. Justin Barrett in his book as well gives plenty of examples, actual personal cases where atheist parents, but the children believe in God, right? So these experiments and this is not just one experiment, it's multiple experiments to show that children whose parents are atheists have an innate belief in a creator. And then obviously the question is, how do they have that innate belief? So I do strongly hold to that position that we do have innate belief in a creator.
I agree. Yeah. And there's another question that kind of arises from here, and definitely something that the atheist is going to lead on to, is, will which God? And that's definitely
interesting you said that, because Oliver Petrovich actually mentions this, that the belief in a non-anthropomorphic God, she says, is cognitive natural, and an anthropomorphic God, she said basically the children don't have an idea of God being a man, but they had an idea of a non-anthropomorphic concept of God. And she actually says this in her articles, that basically when children conceive of a God, they don't actually conceive of a man in Christianity, but conceive of a non-anthropomorphic God, which obviously inshallah I can send on another session. We can go into it, and I can post obviously the references.
Inshallah. And also just kind of point to this. So with regards to, if you've been listening to us and you do find, and I know that we can often get quite abstract with these arguments, and it can get a bit technical, but if for whatever reason you've been convinced by the arguments for necessary being, for being that is independent, that has a will, etc., then what this means is that it writes off a number of particular kinds of gods. So if there is a particular god that is being referenced, and this god was born, so people talk about Zeus or Thor or blah 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 blah, all of these gods had births. All of these gods had a beginning and an end. They are themselves contingent beings, and so although people might apply the word God to them, they would be contained in the set of all contingent things. That is, that they can exist and not exist, and so therefore are not the necessary being. And you can write them off. Those things we're saying are not worthy of worship. We're saying that the only thing worthy of worship is the necessary being, the highest being, the creator of all things, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if you are convinced by this, then what we're saying is that if anyone professes belief in a necessary being that is eternal, that is independent, that is one, and not one that is a divisible one or a multiple, or one that can be multiplied, it is a unique being that is non-anthropomorphic and exists independently. Anything that calls to that is calling to Tawheed, is calling to monotheism. Now, obviously, if you go before Islam, you have multiple religions professing, well, even after Islam, but just in general, we would say that these have an element of truth to them. And Allah has given us a final religion, which is Islam. And so long as people, and what you find is that when people who do believe in Tawheed and they happen to be upon other religions, they often end up converting to Islam. And Islam was easily able to spread because I would posit the fitra, people naturally incline towards its message. They naturally sync up with this idea of Tawheed, with the idea of pure monotheism. And all you need to do is again look at these studies that we constantly pull up of the conversion rates. Many people are leaving religions like Christianity, and they're becoming non-affiliated. Now, the groups that are considered non-affiliated, that doesn't mean atheist, because you get this a lot as well. They look, someone will pull up that Pew Research and go, "Oh, look, non-affiliated atheism is the fastest growing thing." It's no, hold on a second. Like the biggest group, so people are leaving religion, but that doesn't stop them being spiritual. That doesn't mean that they don't believe in a higher power. It just means they're not affiliated to any particular religion. And being unaffiliated does not necessitate atheism. In fact, atheism is the minority out of the unaffiliated. You have a very a large growing of the spiritual but not religious types who still believe. That is, we're saying they're still upon the fitrah. And it takes a lot of effort to take away what that posits, what that pushes to move towards this a denial of God in any sense. So I'm going to kind of wrap it up there, and I'm not going to say any more.
Really quick, just for a minute, because Brother Muhammad Hanif was raising some good points in the chat, and I just want to bring that to attention. But there are issues with this view of fitrah in the sense that it is a bit circular, in the sense that it might be a self-evident truth, but you can't really objectively demonstrate it.
It's not necessarily. So I would say that if people look at it in a circular way, but that would basically say that you say A, therefore B, therefore A, therefore B, and you're saying it in a sense that they rely upon each other. But when we're talking about the fitrah, the way I always look at it is like you're moving back or down. So if say you're at the top of a building and you're trying to figure out like what is it that underpins this building, and so you start working down the layers of the building, and you go from floor to floor to floor to floor until you get to the foundation. You get to the bottom, and then you see, well, this is what is keeping this building up. You go to the bottom, you figure out the foundation, and then you turn around and you move back up. So that's not the same as a circular argument. When we're talking about the fitrah, we're saying that we have this disposition to believe in something, and that the truth of it just screams out to you. And recognizing this and moving back down to that foundation and seeing it, and then recognizing its existence, and recognizing all these other things, the necessity of a independent being, etc. Once you've gotten this foundation, you can turn around, you can move back up. That's not the same as a circular argument in the form of, for example, how do we know that God exists? The Quran says it. Who wrote the Quran? God. Well, how do you know God exists? Because the Quran says it. That's clearly circular, because each element depends on the other. When we're talking about the fitrah, we're talking about this sense of you can recognize the existence of the fitrah through empirical studies, like the ones that Brother Mustahsin has made mention to, and you can look at the commonality of a belief in the spirit, in spirituality, in a higher power, through as something that even Richard Dawkins, I don't know why Joe Rogan's taken this podcast down recently, but he did a podcast with Richard Dawkins, and he put the question to him. He says, has there ever been a non-religious society? And Richard Dawkins clearly answered to that was no, there hasn't been. And the question here is why? Why is the most successful species so inclined towards spirituality, so inclined towards the belief of a higher power? And again, there's this root of monotheism in even the polytheistic religions. You look at Hinduism, they still have this idea of an eternal being, and all these other contingent beings that they can keep referring to as God emanate from this thing. That is, that they are contingent beings that come into being, and there is this necessary existence that precedes them. And we would just say, listen, all of these extra things that they're adding onto it, whether it's the Hindus, whether it's the the Greek polytheists, or the Romans, or the Vikings with their own version of polytheism, all of these things, they have their family trees. And this thing gave birth to this thing. Thor, his father was this guy. You've got Kronos over here with the Greeks, and blah blah blah. And like, if you go far enough up that family tree, eventually you end up. What we're saying is, you get to this necessary being, and we can have debates about whether or not these things existed or not. To be honest, it's superfluous. They may have done, and we can explain that as just being jinn. Like, they could have been beings that were quite powerful. Or they could just not have existed at all. They could have been human beings that existed, and certain attributes were exaggerated, and they became deified. And you see this with ancestor worship. Like, there's examples of that recently. So in Korea, one of the temples I stayed at, it was built by a man maybe 50 years ago, maybe between 50 and 100 years ago. And he has a statue in there now that is worshipped. There is a statue of him in there that's worshipped. And this is the reverence of a being that existed. People hold someone in high regard. They create an idol of him. It's worshipped. Generations and generations pass. And eventually people forget the original origin of this thing. And people add extra things onto it. And it develops and it evolves into something way beyond what it began as. And so for us, as far as we're concerned, when we're looking at all of these extra religions, the polytheistic ones, all they're dealing with is contingent beings. And insofar as they make any reference to a necessary being, we're saying that necessary being is Allah. And they've just taken the focus away from it, and they look at other stuff. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to say anymore, and then I went on another huge.
Abdulrahman, what was his argument? Say it was circular. Sorry.
So okay, so Brother Hanif is saying basically, how do you reconcile the Quran 1678 with the fitrah? And I think that verse says that we are born not knowing anything, right?
Which
لا تعلمون شيئا. 1678.
Yeah. So how do you reckon? Is that his question, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm personally undecided on any of this, so I'm just listening here. But I think the objections are good, and they help us really form a better understanding of what
the claim. Are we making the claim? Do you know what I mean? That we're born with the knowledge of God when we're in the womb of our mothers. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Allah has brought you out from the wombs of your mothers. Because we're saying that obviously the belief in Allah is innate. It develops, though, doesn't it? Obviously, once we experience the world, it's still innate.
Well, the thing is there's this experience of God prior to birth. There's the verse, I can't remember which one, but it's it clearly says that you testified before this. Now, whether or not you still have knowledge, or there's a forgetting that occurs, that could easily explain this quote unquote not having knowledge anymore. Because you start young, you've got to develop your cognitive capacities and things like that. So experience doesn't have to follow from the fact that there was an experience, that there is a consistent knowledge and this innate inclination towards the belief in a God, or this innate understanding, or things like that. This wouldn't necessarily lead to a consistent remembering or a consistent, something that you can pinpoint in the brain and say, oh, well, look, here's the knowledge, or what's not. So for me, I would say, it's quite simple.
How about we have a stream sometime about this issue of innate knowledge and the fitrah, and it will be definitely related to epistemology, so we can have a general stream about epistemology, and Brother Hanif, inshallah, can come on and give us his thoughts.
I think just really before, just wanting to add my 2 pennies worth. I think, look, the issue is this. The way I look at this is that the fitrah exists in terms of the idea that human beings have something innate within themselves. Whether that's mental capacity, whether that is instinctual drives, whether that is the ability to form language and grammar, all of these things. However, I don't think we should necessarily leave that as the basis by which we then determine belief in Islam. We still need to establish certain rational arguments for belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the belief that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We shouldn't leave it just simply to an emotional feeling. And I don't think any of the brothers here or prior, the other brothers who came on before, are saying that we should just simply leave it at that point. I think also the other thing is that it has to be developed. Even if you're arguing fitrah leads to belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to articulate that in a rational grounding. You have to rationally ground the argument as well. So so you can't simply just leave it as an emotional discussion and leaving it like that. You have to ground it as a rational argument. I think Yusuf mentioned some rational arguments in terms of the fact that all societies across all times and all positions have all believed in a God. And Mustahsin's given a couple of examples of Justin Barrett, Roger Trigg, Oxford University, anthropological department. They've done research into this. So I think this is the issue that we have to look at. Sorry, Mustahsin, you're going to say something?
To be honest, obviously we don't have time now, so we'll have to go through it, inshallah, in another session. I actually want to present a rational demonstration of why the fitrah obviously exists.
Yeah, we can do that on a separate
We'll
stream.
discuss that on a separate stream.
We've already gone 20 minutes over what we need to.
Just going back, because obviously I think it's important we just go back. Ultimately, I think what Moel mentioned earlier, and there's so many different angles when it comes to the issue of atheism and the incoherency, the way it falls into an incoherency. One is obviously the rational arguments, the fact that you have contingent beings and you need a necessary foundation. Secondly is the fact that rationality itself cannot be grounded under an atheistic, materialistic worldview. It fails. If you're a determinist, your thoughts are not determined based upon the rational arguments. Your thoughts are determined based upon causal principles or causality of non-conscious physical entities that existed even prior to your existence. So your thinking process, your ability to come to a particular thought is not based upon weighing up arguments. It's based upon, non-conscious physical agents that have interacted with each other over, a various, time period, etc. So therefore, even, rationality cannot be grounded under an atheistic, materialistic point of view. So, there's so many different angles with regards to this, but ultimately, and I just want to give a very brief example on this point, which is, and this is where maybe sort of links the fitrah and the innate aspect to the rational aspect to this. If you show anybody a painting, like, for example, a painting of the Mona Lisa, automatically the person's going to conclude there is a painter. He might not know who the painter is, but he's going to automatically conclude there is a painter. His argument, his ability to conclude the painter, he might not be able to articulate it, in a very strong, robust philosophical argument. It doesn't make his conclusion flawed or irrational. But if now what we have people saying, no, there is no painter for the painting. So then you have to provide maybe extra details. And the primary aspect of us concluding a painter, from maybe if we break it down rationally, is that we conclude the fact that paint does not determine the existence of a particular picture. You need something external to the paint, to the colors, to the canvas in order to produce a particular painting. That's why we call it a contingent being or a possible being, because it had a number of possibilities. It could be painted in a number of different possibilities. And so you need something external to it to give it its explanation as to why it's that particular painting as opposed to any others. And that's the same argument, or one of the arguments that we've used here, which is the contingency argument. Contingency argument basically says that everything that we sense within the universe is something which is limited. It has certain attributes and it has existence which is not necessary to itself. So it doesn't have to exist and it doesn't have to have the attributes that it has. So therefore, we're going to say it could have been another way. The reality could have existed in another way. So we need something external to what we sense around us, the limited contingent beings, to give it its explanation. Now, those things that give it its explanation, if it itself is contingent, we're still going to ask the question, what determined that as well? Yeah. And if we discount an infinite regress, which is a logical absurdity, then we have to conclude that the only way to explain why a contingent possible beings exist is by reference to a necessary, independent, unlimited creator, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one of the basic foundational arguments. So it's very similar to the painting example in this context. And for many of us, yeah, we would automatically, innately conclude that there's a creator without going through this deeper level of discussion. But we're going through it because of the way the atheists have come and tried to muddy the discussions.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there. So we've done a nice 2 hour, 25 minutes, alhamdulillah. And it's been a really great conversation. So we'll just say farewell to Mo'el. Jazakallah khair again for your contribution there. May Allah bless you, and we'll see you again.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. So everyone, I just want to make a call again. If you're watching and you haven't liked already, please do like, as that helps us with the algorithms, and sort of subscribing, clicking the bell. So if you go to subscribe and then all notifications and you turn them all on, we're going to do one of these, hopefully, inshallah, once every 2 weeks or every second Sunday, inshallah. And there should be a combination of who's present now, along with Brother Jake. And then maybe, inshallah, if one brother can't make it on, we're going to try and mix it up and maybe get some special guests on here and there. And depending on how things go, we might even start expanding a bit beyond just these fortnightly streams. And we'll try and get some special guests on in particular and have a chat with them. So one idea is maybe we'll try and get Brother Justin on, and we'll just grill him for 2 hours straight without inviting any other guests on. So we'll see how that goes, inshallah. And yeah, so just make sure you're subscribing, you're liking, you're sharing the content. Obviously, this video is going to be up there now, even after the stream ends. So do make sure to share that on your social media accounts, as that will help obviously bring in more subscribers and things like that. And yeah, so don't forget to also check out our social media. Brother Mustahsin, did you get that sorted with the Facebook thing? Because that was your job, wasn't it? You there, bro? You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, not yet. Inshallah, we will do soon.
What's going on? It's been 2 weeks, bro.
Inshallah. I thought Sharif said we don't need to do it.
No, he didn't.
Sharif, didn't you say that?
No, I'm pretty sure he said get thingy to help you.
I
think Sharif said it's maybe pointless.
The evidence is on the group chat. I remember talking about get brother Callum to help you, and you and him do the Facebook and the Instagram.
Right. I thought Sharif's comment was like, all right, then we don't need it.
No. That's a false memory, that, bro. That's what we call it.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
I think I did mention that, to be fair, but
I know, but then we overrided that with
okay, I've been overridden.
Yeah, we'll get Callum, inshallah.
Yeah, so we're gonna get a Facebook group sorted, inshallah. Hopefully by the next stream at the latest. I've given him a deadline there. Otherwise, we'll get Brother Mo L to mow you down. Yeah, so do make sure to follow us on Twitter, which is on the screen now at the bottom underneath Sharif and Abdul. And other than that, has anyone else got any closing statements they want to make? Or no?
Just really quickly. I was going to say, we've only really touched the very basic discussion on this. So there's so much more to discuss on this. Inshallah, we'll have more discussions in future going over this topic again from different angles and points.
Inshallah. But yeah, other than that, thank you to everyone who's joined us on the panel today. May Allah bless you all. If you are convinced by anything, I do implore you all to take your shahada and accept, the Islam as a religion. Ashhadu la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his final messenger. And let us know in the comments if you are convinced by anything. Engage with us, ask questions there. And there's a few of us, and we've all got access to the YouTube channel, so we'll try and get everyone to kind of take turns engaging with any of the comments that might pop up in there. But other than that, may Allah bless you all, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.